"Get out, you filthy squatter. This is my house and I won't let trash like you ruin it." Karen's shrill voice sliced through the quiet suburban morning, her finger jabbing toward Marcus like a weapon. Her bleach blonde hair was frazzled, her face twisted into a snarl as she waved a crumpled eviction notice in the air. The stench of her cheap perfume mixed with the acrid smell of freshly cut grass, burning Marcus's nostrils. Marcus Carter stood frozen on the porch of the quaint blue Victorian house, his calloused hands still gripping the moving boxes he'd been carrying. The sun beat down on his skin, but the heat he felt was the slow boil of humiliation. Neighbors peered through curtains, their whispers crawling over him like ants. Karen had been harassing him for weeks, calling the cops for suspicious activity, accusing him of stealing her mail, and now this. "Ma'am, I've lived here for 3 years, Marcus said, his voice steady but strained. "I pay my rent on time. There's been a mistake." Karen snorted, her lip curling. "You expect me to believe that? People like you don't belong here. Pack your things before I call the police." Marcus's chest tightened. "People like you." He knew what she meant. His dark skin, his dreadlocks, his vintage Cadillac parked in the driveway, to Karen they were threats. But what she didn't know was that Marcus had fought tooth and nail to call this place home. After his mother's death, he'd worked double shifts as a mechanic, saving every penny to afford this house in a safer neighborhood. Now it was slipping away. The police arrived minutes later, their badges glinting in the sunlight. Karen folded her arms triumphantly as they handcuffed Marcus, his wrists chafing against the cold metal. "Another black man thinking he can take what isn't his," one officer muttered under his breath. The words landed like a punch. Marcus sat in a jail cell, the fluorescent lights humming like a swarm of bees. The walls smelled of bleach and despair. He replayed Karen's words in his head, "People like you," and felt the old wounds reopen. Growing up, Marcus had learned early that the world saw him as a threat. His father, a decorated soldier, had been shot by police during a traffic stop. Mistaken identity, they said. His mother worked herself to death cleaning houses for women like Karen. Marcus had vowed to rise above the pain, to build a life where he could breathe without fear. This house was his sanctuary. The creaky wooden floors, the sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, the garden where he grew roses in his mother's memory, it was all he had left. But Karen, a new neighbor who'd moved in 6 months prior, had made it her mission to erase him. When Marcus finally posted bail, he returned home to find his belongings scattered on the lawn. Karen stood on his porch, sipping iced tea like a queen. "I told you to leave," she sneered. "This neighborhood doesn't need your kind." Marcus's hands shook. He wanted to scream, to fight, but years of swallowing rage had taught him silence. Instead, he drove to the one place he felt safe, his mechanic shop. The smell of grease and gasoline usually calmed him, but tonight, it felt suffocating. Then his phone rang. "Mr. Carter? This is Attorney Lawson. We need to talk about your property." Marcus frowned. "What property?" "The Victorian house on Elm Street. Our records show it's under a legal trust, your trust. Purchased outright 3 years ago." Marcus's heart stopped. Years ago, his mentor, an elderly Jewish lawyer named Mr. Stein, had helped him buy the house under a pseudonym to avoid racial bias from sellers. Stein and Associates LLC was the name on the deed, a shield against prejudice. Marcus had forgotten. But Karen hadn't done her homework. She'd rented the house from a slumlord who'd forged papers claiming ownership. Now she was the squatter. Marcus's lips curved into a grim smile. "What do I need to do?" "Serve her an eviction notice." The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet street as Marcus stood on the porch of the Victorian house, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the casual where he'd been in the day before. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your heart race. Attorney Lawson stood beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the scene, while a sheriff in uniform waited patiently, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. Karen flung open the door, her face already twisted into a scowl. Her bleach blonde hair was disheveled, and her eyes burned with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You again?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "I'll have you arrested for harassment." Marcus didn't flinch. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, his expression unreadable. He had spent years swallowing his pride, biting his tongue, and now for the first time he felt the weight of justice tipping in his favor. The sheriff stepped forward, holding up a court order like a shield. "Actually, ma'am," he said, his voice steady and authoritative, "you're being evicted. This house belongs to Mr. Carter." Karen's laughter was sharp and brittle, cutting through the stillness of the morning. "That's impossible," she shrieked, her voice rising an octave. She stopped herself, but the word hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. This is a mistake, she stammered, her voice cracking. I paid rent. I have proof. She fumbled with her phone, pulling up bank statements, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. See? Right here. I paid every month. Attorney Lawson stepped forward, her tone calm but firm. You paid rent to a fraud, ma'am. The real owner of this property is Mr. Carter, the man you've been harassing for months, the man you tried to evict. She paused, letting the words sink in. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Karen's knees buckled and she collapsed onto the porch, her designer sunglasses clattering to the ground. Her hands gripped the edge of the wooden steps, her knuckles white. You can't do this to me, she cried, her voice breaking. This is my home. I have nowhere to go. But the sheriff was unmoved. The law is clear, ma'am. You'll need to gather your belongings and leave. Marcus watched the scene unfold, his heart pounding in his chest. He should have felt triumphant, vindicated, but instead he felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also a deep, aching sadness. The neighbors, who had been watching from behind curtains and half-open doors, began to emerge, their whispers growing louder. Some looked shocked, others smug, but all of them were captivated by the drama unfolding on the quiet street. Karen, however, was unraveling. She scrambled to her feet, her face red with humiliation and rage. This isn't over, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus. You think you've won? You're nothing but a... Enough, Marcus interrupted, his voice low but firm. He took a step forward, his presence commanding silence. This isn't about winning. It's about the truth. And the truth is, this is my home. It always has been. Karen opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. She stared at him, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. Then, without another word, she turned and slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the neighborhood. The sheriff handed Marcus the keys to the house, his expression unreadable. It's yours, Mr. Carter. Welcome home. Marcus took the keys, their weight familiar in his hand. He looked at the house, his house, and felt a wave of emotions crash over him. This wasn't just a victory, it was a reclaiming. A reclaiming of his space, his dignity, his right to exist without apology. But as he stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of Karen's perfume and the faint tang of her anger, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Karen's hatred, her ignorance, her refusal to see him as anything but a threat. It was a reminder that the battle wasn't just about a house. It was about something much bigger, something that couldn't be won with a court order or a set of keys. And as the door closed behind him, Marcus knew that the real work was just beginning. The days that followed were heavy with an uneasy quiet. Marcus moved through the rooms of his house like a ghost, trailing his fingers over the walls Karen had defaced with her presence. Her garish decor, gold-framed mirrors, gaudy throw pillows, a neon sign reading "Live, Laugh, Love," felt like a stain. He ripped it all down, tossing it into a pile on the curb. Each item he removed was a reclaiming, a small victory, but the silence of the house echoed with the ghosts of her cruelty. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Curtains twitched as neighbors watched Marcus rebuild his life, their judgment shifting like sand. Some brought casseroles, awkwardly muttering apologies. Others crossed the street to avoid him, their guilt written in their averted eyes. Marcus accepted their gestures with a nod but kept his distance. Trust, once shattered, wasn't easily mended. At night, he'd sit on the porch, the same spot where Karen had hurled her insults, and stare at the stars. The scent of his mother's roses, now trampled and neglected in the garden, mingled with the lingering stench of Karen's perfume. He wondered if his father had felt this hollow after coming home from war, victorious but broken. Meanwhile, Karen holed up in a budget motel on the outskirts of town. The walls were thin, the air thick with the smell of mildew and regret. She spent hours staring at her reflection in the flickering bathroom light, replaying Marcus's words, "Hate made you small." Her designer luggage, once a symbol of status, now held crumpled clothes and unpaid bills. She'd lied to her friends, claiming she was between homes, but the truth gnawed at her. One evening, as she packed the last of her things, a crumpled photo fell from between the pages of a magazine. It was a snapshot of Marcus's mother, her smile radiant, standing in front of the Victorian house decades ago. Karen's breath caught. On the back, in faded ink, was a note. "To my son. Dream big. Love, Mom." The weight of it crushed her. She'd spent years building walls of superiority, convinced she was protecting herself from a world she deemed beneath her. But here was proof of a life she tried to erase, A mother's love, a son's grief, a legacy she dismissed as trash. For the first time, Karen saw Marcus not as a threat but as a mirror. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she wrote a letter, her hands shaking, words spilling out in messy ink. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." No excuses, no justifications. Just 3 sentences that cost her more pride than she knew she had. At dawn, she drove back to Elm Street, the letter clutched in her hand. The house loomed ahead, its blue paint glowing softly in the morning light. Marcus was in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, replanting the roses his mother had loved. Karen hesitated, then slipped the note under his door and fled, her heart pounding like a criminal's. Marcus found it later, the paper damp with dew. He read it once, then folded it into his wallet, a reminder that even the hardest hearts could crack. He didn't forgive her, not yet, but he pitied her. Hate had been her armor, but it had also been her cage. That night, as he pruned the roses, he noticed a single bud beginning to bloom, fragile but alive. The seasons turned, and with them, the scars on Elm Street began to fade. Marcus's garden, once trampled and forgotten, burst into a riot of color, crimson roses climbing the trellis, their petals soft as his mother's hands. He tended them daily, the soil under his nails a badge of pride. The house too shed Karen's shadow. Walls she'd painted garish gold were now a warm ivory, and where her neon sign had hung, Marcus placed his mother's old clock, its steady ticking a heartbeat of renewal. Karen's letter stayed tucked in his wallet, a brittle reminder of humanity's capacity for change. He never saw her again, but rumors trickled in. A woman volunteering at a homeless shelter, her blonde hair streaked with gray, her voice softer, less sure. Marcus didn't seek her out. Some storms, he'd learned, are meant to pass without closure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Marcus hosted a barbecue. Neighbors arrived hesitantly at first, then in clusters, drawn by the smell of smoked ribs and the sound of jazz drifting from his porch. Children darted through the garden, their laughter mingling with the clink of lemonade glasses. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow next door, brought a pie and a confession. "I should have spoken up sooner." Marcus simply smiled. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't for her, it was for him. Later, as fireflies winked in the twilight, Marcus stood at the edge of his garden, a rose in hand. He placed it on the porch step where Karen had once hurled her hate. It wasn't an offering nor a truce. It was a quiet acknowledgement that even the deepest wounds could birth something beautiful. The house on Elm Street became more than a home. It became a testament to a mother's love, a son's resilience, and the unyielding truth that no amount of hate could ever uproot dignity. And in the end, as the roses bloomed wild and unchecked, Marcus knew his mother's legacy had finally found its light. The world tried to bury him. It didn't know he was a seed.